Okay, so you need to be on page 63 in the text, and you're going to be on question 18 in the study guide packet. And the question for number 18 is, in the narrator's nightmare, what was she most concerned about? So remember, we're now in the part of the text where it's very plot driven. You're not going to be able to match up the content of the chapter with anything on your subtopic list. I will let you know when we're getting back into the historical information, but we need to have this plot driven information for you to understand events that happen later in the story. Okay? So on page 63, nightmare. I am awake now, still shaking from my dream. I was coming home through a howling dust storm. My lowered face was scrubbed raw by dirt and wind. Grit scratched my eyes. It crunched between my teeth. Sand chafed inside my clothes, against my skin. Dust crept inside my ears, up my nose, down my throat. I shuddered, nasty with dust. In the house, dust blew through the cracks in the walls. It covered the floorboards and heaped against the doors. It floated in the air everywhere. I didn't care about anyone, anything, only the piano. I searched for it and found it under a mound of dust. I was angry at Ma for letting in the dust. I cleaned off the keys, but when I played, a tortured sound came from the piano, like someone shrieking. I hit the keys with my fist and the piano broke into 100 pieces. Daddy called to me. He asked me to bring water. Ma was thirsty. I brought up a pail of fire and Ma drank it. She had given birth to a baby of flames. The baby burned at her side. I ran away to the Eaton's farm. The house had been tractored out, ripped off its foundation. No one could live there. Everywhere I looked were dunes of rippled dust. The wind roared like fire. The door to the house hung open and there was dust inside, several feet deep, and there was a piano. The piano was gone right through the floor. The piano leaned toward me. I stood and played. The relief I felt to hear the sound of music after the sound of the piano at home. I dragged the Eaton's piano through the dust to our house, but when I got it there, I couldn't play. I had swollen lumps for hands. They dripped a sickly pus. They swung stupidly from my wrists. They stung with pain. When I woke up, the part about my hands was real. So remember, this chapter is entitled Nightmares, and so none of the things that happened in this chapter actually really happened. It was just a dream that the narrator had, but it does reflect her concern about what has happened with her mother. It does reflect her concern about what's happened to her own hands, and also just having to suffer through the dust day after day after day. So again, at this point, I wouldn't worry about matching this up with the subtopic on your list. I would simply pause here and answer question number 18. Okay, the next chapter that we're going to read starts on page 66. It's entitled A Tent of Pain. Your question for that chapter is, what causes Ma to cry out in pain? So on page 66. Daddy has made a tent out of the sheet over Ma so nothing will touch her skin, what skin she has left. I can't look at her. I can't recognize her. She smells like scorched meat, her body groaning there. It looks nothing like my Ma. It doesn't even have a face. Daddy brings her water and drips it inside the slit of her mouth by squeezing a cloth. She can't open her eyes. She cries out when the baby moves inside her. Otherwise, she moans day and night. I wish the dust would plug my ears so I couldn't hear her. Okay, again, stop there. Answer question 19. Don't worry about matching it up with a subtopic. And when you're done, go ahead and flip to page 67 for drinking. Okay, on page 67, the chapter entitled Drinking. Your question for that chapter is, what did Daddy do with the emergency money? Daddy found the money Ma kept squirreled in the kitchen under the threshold. It wasn't very much, but it was enough for him to get good and drunk. He went out last night while Ma moaned and begged for water. He drank up the emergency money until it was gone. I tried to help her. I couldn't aim the dripping cloth into her mouth. I couldn't squeeze. I hurt the blisters on my hands to try. I only made it worse for Ma. She cried for the pain of the water running into her sores. She cried for the water that would not soothe her throat and quench her thirst. And the whole time my father was in Gaiman drinking. Okay, stop there and answer question 20. Again, you do not need to worry about matching that up with the subtopic on your list. Now, just as a point of note, you are going to need to add a summary for these 5 chapters to your overall summary in your template. Again, I would keep it pretty broad, but because they are chapters that we read, you are going to have to add information to your summary, even though they don't specifically touch on the Dust Bowl itself. Okay, so we've now read 3 chapters. We will read 2 more chapters, and then you'll need to stop and make a summary in your template, and I'll prompt you to do that when we get to the end of the 5th chapter. Okay, your next chapter begins on page 20, or I'm sorry, pardon me, it's question 21. It begins on page 68, and it is entitled Devoured. And your question for that chapter, again, number 21, is what happened to Ma's apple trees in the chapter entitled Devoured? Okay, on page 68. Doc sent me outside to get water. The day was so hot. The house was so hot. As I came out the door, I saw the cloud descending. It whirred like 1,000 engines. It shifted shape as it came, settling first over Daddy's wheat. Grasshoppers, eating tassels, leaves, stalks. Then coming closer to the house, eating Ma's garden, the fence posts, the laundry on the line, and then the grasshoppers came right over me, descending on Ma's apple trees. I climbed into the trees, opening scabs on my tender hands, grasshoppers clinging to me. I tried beating them away, but the grasshoppers ate every leaf. They ate every piece of fruit. Nothing but a couple apple cores hanging from Ma's trees. I couldn't tell her, couldn't bring myself to say her apples were gone. I never had a chance. Ma died that day, giving birth to my brother. Okay, stop there and answer question number 21. And then the next chapter, which is entitled Blame, begins on page 70. And that would be question number 22. And that question is, after whom was the narrator's baby brother named? Okay, so on page 70, chapter entitled Blame. My father's sister came to fetch my brother even as Ma's body cooled. She came to bring my brother back to Lubbock to raise as her own, but my brother died before Aunt Ellis got here. She wouldn't even hold his little body. She barely noticed me. As soon as she found my brother dead, she had a talk with my father. Then she turned around and headed back to Lubbock. The neighbor women came. They wrapped my baby brother in a blanket and placed him in Ma's bandaged arms. We buried them together on the rise Ma loved, the one she gazed at from the kitchen window, the one that looks out over the dried up Beaver River. Reverend Bingham led the service. He talked about Ma, but what he said made no sense, and I could tell he didn't truly know her. He'd never even heard her play piano. He asked my father to name my baby brother. My father hunched over, said nothing. I spoke up in my father's silence. I told the Reverend my brother's name was Franklin, like our president. The women talked as they scrubbed death from our house. I stayed in my room, silent on the iron bed, listening to their voices. Billy Joe threw the pail, they said. An accident, they said. Under their words, a finger pointed. They didn't talk about my father leaving kerosene by the stove. They didn't say a word about my father drinking himself into a stupor while Ma writhed, begging for water. They only said, Billy Joe threw the pail of kerosene. Okay, stop there and answer question 22. After whom was the narrator's baby brother named? And at this point, you're going to want to pause and you're going to want to go into your writing template and you're going to want to add another sentence to your summary. Okay, so think about the fact that since chapter 18, Ma was in a lot of pain as a result of the accident. Her condition got worse and worse. She eventually died when she was giving birth to the narrator's baby brother. And then the narrator's baby brother eventually died as well. So those are the types of things you're going to want to cover in your summary sentence. Again, you don't want to go into a lot of detail because it doesn't pertain to the Dust Bowl, and that's what you want to focus on for your history teachers. So go ahead and pause the recording here, answer question number 22, and then go in and do your summary sentence, and then come back and restart the recording. Okay, the next chapter is going to pertain to the Dust Bowl, so you are going to want to match it up with one of the subtopics on your subtopic sheet. So we're looking at question number 23, and that question reads, what does President Roosevelt advise farmers in the Dust Bowl region to do in the chapter entitled Roots? Roots begins on page 75, okay? So you're going to skip ahead a couple of chapters, or one, actually. Okay, page 75, Roots. President Roosevelt tells us to plant trees. Trees will break the wind. He says trees will end the drought. The animals can take shelter there. Children can take shelter. Trees have roots, he says. They hold on to the land. That's good advice, but I'm not sure he understands the problem. Trees have never been at home here. They're just not meant to be here. Maybe none of us are meant to be here, only the prairie grass and the hawks. My father will stay no matter what. He's stubborn as sod. He and the land have a hold on each other. But what about me? Okay, so stop there. Match this chapter up with one of the subtopics on your subtopic list. Place that letter in the margin next to where it says Roots, page 75, question 23, and then go ahead and answer question number 23. The next chapter, The Path of Our Sorrow, begins on page 83. So you're going to have a significant jump, almost a 10-page jump, because the chapters in between don't directly relate to the Dust Bowl. So go ahead and turn to page 83. You're going to be looking at question number 24, which is, according to Billy Joe's teacher, how did World War I lead to the Dust Bowl? So think about that question when you're matching it up with one of your subtopics. Look for the subtopic that talks about what led to the Dust Bowl, what caused the Dust Bowl, okay? So you're going to go ahead and flip to page 83. I'm going to do that also. And you're going to be reading The Path of Our Sorrow. Miss Freeland said, during the Great War, we fed the world. We couldn't grow enough wheat to fill all the bellies. The price the world paid for our wheat was so high it swelled our wallets and our heads, and we bought bigger tractors, more acres, until we had mortgages and rent and bills beyond reason. But we all felt so useful we didn't notice. Then the war ended, and before long, Europe didn't need our wheat anymore. They could grow their own. But we needed Europe's money to pay our mortgage, our rent, our bills. We squeezed more cattle, more sheep onto less land, and they grazed down the stubble till they reached the root. And the price of wheat kept dropping, so we had to grow more bushels to make the same amount of money we made before, to pay for all that equipment, all that land. And the more sod we plowed up, the drier things got, because the water that used to collect there under the grass, biding its time, keeping things alive through the dry spells, wasn't there anymore. Without the sod, the water vanished. The soil turned to dust, until the wind took it, lifting it up and carrying it away. Such a sorrow doesn't come suddenly. There are 1,000 steps to take before you get there. But now, sorrow climbs up our front steps, big as Texas, and we didn't even see it coming, even though it had been making its way straight for us all along. Okay, so when you're looking at this chapter, think about the section of the history book where it talked about how the farmers overworked the land and how that depleted the sod that was holding the land down, and then inevitably led to the Dust Bowl, amongst other things. So go ahead and answer question number 24, match number 24 up with one of your subtopics, and then you're going to want to turn to page 102. Again, another big leap in the text. Okay, the chapter that begins on page 102 is entitled Driving the Cows, and you're going to be answering question number 25 for this one. And number 25 reads, what happened to Joe LaFleur's cows in the chapter entitled Driving the Cows? And this will, again, match up with something on your subtopic list. So be looking at your subtopic list and thinking about that as you're reading the chapter. Okay, on page 102, Driving the Cows. Dust piles up like snow across the prairie, dunes leaning against fences, mountains of dust pushing over barns. Joe De La Fleur can't afford to feed his cows, can't afford to sell them. County Agent Dewey comes, takes the cows behind the barn, and shoots them. Too hard to watch their lungs clog with dust, like our chickens, suffocated. Better to let the government take them than suffer the sight of their bony hides sinking down into the earth. Joe De La Fleur rides the range. Come spring, he'll gather Russian thistle, pulling the plant while it's still green and young, before the prickles form, before it breaks free to tumble across the plains. He gathers thistle to feed what's left of his cattle, his bone-thin cattle. Cattle he drives away from the dried-up Beaver River to where the Cimarron still runs, pushing the herd across the breaks, where they might last another week, maybe two, until it rains. Okay, go ahead and stop there and answer question number 25. And we'll have one more chapter to go before you need to go ahead and do your summary in the text. Or I'm sorry, pardon me, your summary in your template. Let me check while you're answering your question, your reading schedule quickly here. Yes, I skipped a chapter. I wondered about that. This particular chapter does not have a question that accompanies it. It says Christmas dinner without the cranberry sauce, pages 100 through 101. So you are simply going to cross that chapter out. That was a chapter that I had the students read last year, but I'm not going to have you read that chapter this year. Okay, so go ahead and cross out Christmas dinner without the cranberry sauce, and we will not worry about that chapter. Okay, I thought something was a little off there. Go ahead and cross that chapter off. Okay, so that'll bring you to the end of another 5 chapters technically. So after you answer the question for driving the cows, you're going to go ahead and add another summary sentence to your pre-writing template. Okay, as always, if you have any questions or need help, make sure you let Mrs. Beals and I know. We will be happy to come around and help you out.